touchy thing and my fingerprint today. Today's gospel speaks of a great disturbance. So great that the disciples, who are fishermen, fear for their own lives. One commentator points out that this is a remarkable story. Mark is not particularly interested in geographical details, but gets Jesus and his disciples to cross the sea. Now, it's been mentioned before that Mark has a lot of coming and going. Jesus is constantly on the move. Jesus just decides out of nowhere to just up and leave. And they could have walked elsewhere. There were towns nearby. But instead, they got into the boats and went across the Sea of Galilee. Now, when we think of sea, we think of what's out here just a few miles down the road. The Sea of Galilee, also known as Kinneret, is a freshwater lake. It's also known as Lake of Gennesaret, which you may recall is the madman. Literally, the madman across the water. It's 33 miles in circumference, 13 miles long one way and 8 miles across the other way. And at its fullest, it's only 141 feet deep. And it sits below sea level. There's only one lake, one body of water that's lower than that, and that's the Dead Sea. Crossing the Sea of Galilee is normally not a big deal. Most of the time, anyway. And well, Jesus is with a bunch of fishermen, so what could go wrong? Well, we hear of a storm or a great wind, depending on which translation you read. But this is fairly common. Yet the disciples panic. The waves are coming into the boat, and the boat is starting to fill, and yet Jesus sleeps. Now, this got me to wondering what the boat looked like if Jesus could sleep in a storm. And luckily, back in the 80s, they actually found one. When the sea was down low, they found an ancient Galilean boat that dates back to about 180, so it's about the same time. And it's known as the Jesus boat, though it has no connection whatsoever, historically, to anyone that we know of. The boat is 27 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. Now, people were shorter then, so you could see how Jesus might have been just lying across maybe a seat or something. But how do you not get wet if the waves are splashing in and filling the boat? Or better yet, how do you not roll off if the waves are tossing the boat so much that they're coming in? So either the disciples are panicking for no reason, or Jesus can sleep well balanced while rocking violently and wet. I suspect, knowing the disciples, they were panicked for no good reason. Well, maybe one good reason, so that we might learn to have faith or to trust in the Lord. As often happens in these parts, a storm comes up unexpectedly and the disciples panic, accusing Jesus of indifference to their fate. Like someone calling a boisterous dog, Jesus orders the sea to behave, and it does. Then he rebukes the disciples for the first time, indicating the importance of faith. The importance of faith, the importance of trusting, the importance of looking to see God with them. If you want to see God active in your life, if you want to see Jesus active in your life, take a moment and just look around. Unfortunately, as much for the disciples as for us, we are caught up in our own storms, our own mishaps, our own illnesses, weaknesses, our own needs, fears, our own I got to have it because I want it moments. How many times do we, in our most significant hours of need, lift prayers in dire earnest? And yet, how often in our least important moments of the day do we nonchalantly turn to the Lord and just say, please God? In the end, they all have the same measure. In the end, we rarely look to see the answer. In the end, we rarely pause to say thank you. We rarely stop to acknowledge God's presence in our lives. Now, I'm not saying we don't do it. We wouldn't be here. But what about the other 6 days of the week? I'm just asking because it got me wondering as I read this passage. But now we have this calming of the sea happening neither here nor there. They're en route from one place to another where this miracle occurs. And one commenter does point out that Jesus likes to show up in the liminal spaces in Mark. These places of transition or rift. He chooses to go to marginal spaces, away from life's regular patterns, near a graveyard, at a deathbed, or hoisted up top Golgotha. He situates himself at a geographical boundary lands, like the wilderness, or the mountaintops, or Tyre, or Caesarea Philippi. He also goes to social-political borderlands, politically charged locations, like a tax collector's home, and the land outside of Jerusalem during Passover. The Sea of Galilee was both kinds of places. Geographically, it has separated the peoples from one shore from those on the other side. Socio-politically, it provided sustenance to Galileans and generated resources that Rome could extract from those who depended on it to make a living. It kept populations distant from each other, and it fed imperial appetites. It's a great quote. And this is important on two aspects. Symbolically calming the waters that are agitated by imperial power could symbolize the fact Jesus' life has on all powers that be. Eventually, they will calm by Christ's command. The first part of this comment that Jesus likes to show up in the liminal spaces, I like a lot. Jesus in the in-between space. That spot where you're neither in or out. That place where you're neither here nor there. The scariest of all places, where it's in the in-between space, where we tend to be the most insecure, the most frightened, and sometimes the most lost. It's in these places that we often go in prayer to seek out the answers. We like to call it the fork in the road. Do I turn left? Do I turn right? It's in these most difficult of times in life that Jesus tends to show up, whether we're paying attention or not. Quote, life stands toe-to-toe with death at many of the borders in Mark. Some of the boundaries separate what's holy from what defiles, and they keep outsiders away from insiders. It's how dividing up lines work. They allow us to keep what is known on one side, and we banish whatever makes us fearful to the other side of the fence. End quote. We banish whatever makes us fearful to the other side of the fence. Does that sound familiar? This week has been horrendous with the headlines of migrant families torn apart because of an arbitrary rule that the current administration had created. There is this us versus them attitude that is terrible. Since when has it been illegal to be human? Since when is it illegal to be a child? And since when does this country turn away those in need seeking a better life? Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but welcomes the one who sent me. So what does that say about our nation, who currently does not welcome children, but treats them as criminals and places them in concentration camps? I'm sorry. This whole week has made me very angry. And quite frankly, I've learned I cannot trust this administration to do anything that even remotely appears to be just. Now, I have heard the argument that asks, where are we supposed to put all these refugees? We are going to run out of land. Now, to me, this is just to me, it appears as this really comes down to that little argument, not in my backyard. As Christians, our initial response should be, come here. Let us help you. Let us feed you. Let us clothe you. Let us make you safe. And then, let's see what we can do to help make your home better. I believe we can do so much better as a nation and as a people than what we've been doing these past few weeks. And it's the Christian voices that are standing in opposition that are bringing this to the forefront. These dividing lines, this us versus them, well, either Jesus declares that those separations don't work, or that if they do work, he intends to tear them down. And Jesus is calling us to do the same. You know, if we stop worrying about having the most land, the most money, controlling the world, and instead actually started to care for this world, we can reverse a lot of the damage that's already been done to the earth, and we can actually feed the world. In an article I recently read, it says that, quote, farms are already growing enough food for every person on the planet, 2,800 calories a day, if it were divided up equally. But we never shared resources equally, and no one seems to have figured out a realistic way of making people start. The challenge of feeding humanity is enormous and unprecedented. No species, this is still the quote, that I know of has ever organized itself to ensure that everyone of its kind is fed. Now, we have the means to meet this demand in short term, and we are in the process of figuring out how to meet it in the long term. Human welfare depends on us figuring this out, and so does the welfare of thousands of other species that live alongside us, end quote. I believe this world is on a cusp. And right now, America, our society and culture, is standing at the heart of that liminal space, that in-between space, that space of danger and risk, that place of insecurity, a place that, quite frankly, we have created. But in liminal places, Jesus conducts ministry. Jesus opens minds to new possibilities and sets people free to enter into a new future in freedom and in wholeness. Jesus meddles with the borders, not because he has a penchant for chaos, but because the reign of God extends divine holiness and a commitment to human well-being to places that we might have thought were beyond the limits. To Jesus, no place is desolate. No one is abandoned. We are faced with a great opportunity to prayerfully and carefully enter into dialogue. Dialogue with each other, with those in our community, and with those who are seeking kindness and help. We have an opportunity to see the blessings that the migrant is to us. For the migrant is nothing more than the stranger at the door. And ironically, the doorway is a liminal space. For in the doorway, you're neither here nor there. You know, today they're celebrating Pride over in San Francisco, and there was a time when the LGBT community was a threat to Christianity. Heck, we were the threat to the fabric of the country at one time. And if you want to look through our history, we've had a lot of threats to this country. In the late 19th century, political cartoonist Thomas Nast regularly lambasted Irish Catholic immigrants as drunkards and barbarians, unfit for citizenship. Signs used to read, "No Irish need apply." Statesmen warned about the dangers of admitting Catholics from Southern and Eastern Europe into America's shores, for fear they were somewhat less than civilized and less than white. It wasn't unusual for respectable politicians to wonder aloud whether Catholics could be loyal to their adopted country or to the Pope. And of course, we all know the time when how we've treated the Japanese and the Italians with our particular way of favoring strangers in our country. The incarceration of Japanese Americans is best known effective Executive Order 9066. The rule signed by Franklin Roosevelt in 1942, and is well known for good reason. The suffering and punishment placed upon innocent Japanese Americans was a dark chapter in American history. But the full extent of the governing order is largely unknown. In addition to forcibly evacuating 120,000 Americans of Japanese background from their homes to barbed wire encircled camps, it also called for the compulsory relocation of more than 10,000 Italian Americans and restricted the movements of more than 600,000 Italian Americans nationwide. Now, just for the sake of my parents' history, I'm going to throw in one more. Anti-Polish sentiment in the early 20th century relegated Polish immigrants to a very low status in American society. Other white ethnic groups such as Irish and German had assimilated to the American language and gained powerful positions in the Catholic Church, and in various government positions. But the Poles were seen with disdain. The truth is, we always have someone to blame for any and or all our woes. It's very American. It's always the immigrant's fault, be it German or Italian, Maltese or Russian, Japanese or Chinese, Arabic, Muslim, or someone from South America. There will always be someone at our borders, and they will always receive the blame for something or the other until we change the way we treat each other. Until we change the way we acknowledge the other in our society. So Jesus banishes harmful spirits, welcomes outsiders and disadvantaged people, restores community, exposes the lies that prop up counterfeit standards of greatness, and defeats death. Nothing will inhibit Jesus' desire to do ministry on, quote, the other side. We as Christians have a hard choice today. It is difficult and it calls from the margins to stand up, to pray for and seek out justice for the least of our brothers and sisters, no matter where they are from. There is a sudden storm brewing, and Jesus doesn't care. In the end, it doesn't matter what it is that threatens to keep Jesus from crossing the lake. What's more important is that Jesus will not be deterred and that we have faith. We are invited to get into that boat and follow. We are challenged to trust in Jesus and the gospel as our way, as the Christian way. You see, we are called to be disciples of Jesus, and as the disciples, we need to pay attention to those disciples. And what about those disciples? Well, as for them, they keep getting into boats with Jesus. In other words, they continue to follow Jesus, which is what Jesus asked them to do in the first place. If they are to remain Christ's followers for a long haul, they will need to know all the dimensions of Christ's ministry of deliverance entails. They'll also need to learn about what rejection comes with that territory. Now, I know I'm going to get some backlash and rejection, or I'll hear about it from one or two people we're speaking up, but I know if we stand up as Christians, we will be a challenge to our neighbors, and maybe an answer to those in need. I know my salvation does not lie in anyone's opinion except for my God's. And whatever you do to the least of these is a gospel verse that I will always quote in the face of opposition. Amen.